Chapter 15 of Masters of the Vortex by E. E. Smith. Chapter 15 Joan and Her Brains. The trip from Chicoladoria to Vegia, while fairly long, was uneventful. Joan spent her working hours, of course, at her regular job of rebuilding the giant computer. Cloud spent his at the galactic chart or in the control room staring into a tank, classifying, analyzing, building up and knocking down hypotheses and theories, wringing every possible drop of knowledge from all the data he could collect. In their spare time, of which each had quite a great deal, they worked together at their telepathy, to such good purpose that when so working, verbal communication between them became rarer and rarer. And alone or in a crowd, within sight of each other or not, in any place or any time, asleep or awake, each had only to think at the other and they were instantly in full mental rapport. And oftener there came those instantaneously fleeting touches of something infinitely more than mere telepathy, that fusion of minds which was so ultimately intimate that neither of the two could have said whether he longed for or dreaded its full coming the more. In fact, for several days before reaching Vegia, each knew that they could bring about that full fusion any time they chose to do so, but both shied away from its consummation, each as violently as the other. Thus the trip did not seem nearly as long as it actually was. The first order of business on Vegia, of course, was the extinguishment of its 5 loose atomic vortices, for which reason this was to be pretty much a planetary holiday, although that is of little concern here. As the Vortex Blaster 2 began settling into position, the 2 scientists took their places. Cloud was apparently his usual self-controlled self, but Joan was white and strained, almost shaking. He sent her a steadying thought, but her block was up, solid. "Don't take it so hard, Joni," he said soberly. "Margie'll take 'em, I hope. But even if she doesn't, there's a dozen things not tried yet." "That's the trouble, there aren't. We put just about everything we had into Lulu. Margie's only a few milliseconds better. Perhaps there are a dozen things not tried yet, but I haven't the faintest, foggiest smidgen of an idea of what any of them could be. Margie's the last word, Storm. The best analog computer it's possible to build with today's knowledge." "And I haven't been a lick of help. I wish I could be, Joan." "I don't see how you can be. Oh, excuse me, Storm, I didn't mean that half the way it sounds. Do you want to check the circuitry? I'll send for the prints." "No, I couldn't even carry your water bottle on that part of the job. I've got just that sort of a dim, half-baked idea that there's a possibility that maybe I haven't been giving you and your brains a square deal. By studying the graphs the next 3 or 4 tests, maybe I can find out whether—" "Lieutenant Commander Janowek, we're in position," a crisp voice came from the speaker. "You may take over when ready, madame." "Thank you, sir." Joan flipped a switch and Margie took control of the ship and its armament, subject only to Cloud's overriding right to fire at will. "Just a minute, Storm," Joan said then. "Unfinished business. Whether what?" "Whether there's anything I can do or fail to do that might help. But I've got to have a lot more data." Cloud turned to his chart, Joan to hers, and nothing happened until Cloud blew out the vortex himself. The same lack of something happened in the case of the next vortex, and also the next. Then, as the instruments began working in earnest on the 4th, Cloud reviewed in his mind the figures of the 3 previous trials. On the first vortex, a big toughie, Margie had been 250 milliseconds short. On the second, a fairly small one, she'd come up to 75. On number 3, middle size, the lag had been 125. That made sense. Lag was proportional to activity, and it was just too bad for Margie. And just too damn bad for Joni. The poor kid was about to blow her stack. But wait a minute, what's this? This number 4 is a little bit of a new one, about as small as they ever come. Margie ought to be taking it if she's ever going to take anything. But she isn't. She's running damn near 300 mils behind. Why? Oh, amplitudes, frequencies, extreme instability. Lag isn't proportional only to activity then, but jointly to activity and to instability. That gives us a chance, but what in all 9 of Palane's purple hells is that machine doing with that data? He started to climb out of his bucket seat to go around and talk to Joan right then, but changed his mind at his first move. Even if Margie could handle this little one, it wouldn't be a real test, and it'd be a crying shame to give Joan a success here and then kick her in the teeth with a flat failure next time. No, the next one, the only one left and Vegia's worst, would be the one. If Margie could handle that, she could snuff anything the galaxy had to offer. Hence Cloud extinguished this one too, himself. The Vortex Blaster 2 darted to its last Vegian objective and lined itself up for business. Joan put Margie to work as usual, but Storm, for the first time, did not take his own place. Instead, he came around and stood behind Joan's chair. "How are we doing, little chum?" he asked. "Rotten." Joan's block was still up. Her voice was choked with tears. "She's come so close 6 times today. Why can't I get that last fraction of a second?" "Maybe you can." As though it were the most natural thing in the world, which in fact it was. Cloud put his left arm around her shoulders and exerted a gentle pressure. "Bars down, chum. We can think a lot clearer than we can talk." "That's better," as her guard went down. "Your differential scope looks like it's set at about 1 centimeter to the second. Can you give it enough vertical gain to make it about 5? "Yes, 10 if you like. But the trace would just keep jumping the screen on the downswings." "I wouldn't care about that. Closest approach is all I want. Give it full gain." "QX, but why?" Joan demanded, as she made the requested adjustment. "Did you find out something I can't dig deep enough in your mind to pry loose?" "Don't know yet whether I did or not. I can tell you in a couple of minutes." And Cloud concentrated his full attention upon the chart and its adjacent oscilloscope screen. One pen of the chart was drawing a thin, wildly wavering red line. A few seconds behind it, a second pen was tracing the red line in black, tracing it so exactly that not the tiniest touch of red was to be seen anywhere along the black. And on the screen of the differential oscilloscope, the fine green sawtooth waveform of the electronic trace, which gave continuously the instantaneous value of the brain's shortage in time, flickered insanely and apparently reasonlessly up and down, occasionally falling clear off the bottom of the screen. If that needle-pointed trace should touch the zero line, however briefly, Margie the brain would act, but it was not coming within 1 full centimeter of touching. The feeling that these failures have been partly or even mostly my fault is growing on me, Cloud thought, tightening his arm a little, and Joan, if anything, yielded to the pressure instead of fighting away from it. "Maybe I haven't been waiting long enough to give your brains the leeway they need. To check, I've been assuming all along that they work in pretty much the same way I do, that they handle all the data out to the limit of validity of the equations, but aren't fast enough to work out a 3.6-second prediction. But if I'm reading those curves right, Margie simply isn't working that way. She doesn't seem to be extrapolating anything more than 3.5 seconds ahead, way short of the reliability limit, and sometimes a lot less than that. She isn't accepting data far enough ahead. She acts as though she can gulp down just so much information without choking on it. So much and no more." "Exactly. An oversimplification, of course, since it isn't the kind of choking that giving her a bigger throat would cure, but very well put." Joan's right hand had crept across her body, rested on Cloud's wrist, and helped his squeeze, while her face turned more directly toward the face so close to hers. "That's inherent in the design of all really fast machines, and we simply don't know any way of getting away from it. Why? What has that to do with the case?" "A lot, I hope. When I was working in a flitter, I had to wait up to half an hour sometimes, for the sigma curve to stabilize enough so that the equations would hold valid, will give a longer valid prediction." "Stabilize? How? I've never seen a sigma curve flatten out. Or does stabilize have a special meaning for you vortex experts?" "Could be. It's what happens when a sigma becomes a little more regular than usual, so that a simpler equation will give a longer valid prediction." "I see. And a difference in waveform that would be imperceptible to me might mean a lot to you." "Right. It just occurred to me that a similar line of reasoning may hold for this seemingly entirely different set of conditions. The less unstable the curve, the less complicated the equations, and the smaller the volume of actual data. Oh! Joan's thoughts soared high. So Margie may work yet, if we wait a while? Check. Browning can't take the ship away from you, can he? No. Nobody can do anything until the job is done, or I punch that red stop button there. Do you suppose she can do it, Storm? How long can we wait? Half an hour, I'd say. No, to settle the point, definitely. Let's wait until I can get a full 10-second prediction, and see what Margie's doing about the situation then. Wonderful. But in that case, it might be a good idea for you to go looking at the chart, don't you think? She asked pointedly. His eyes, at the moment, were looking directly into hers, from a distance of approximately 12 inches. I'll look at that later, but right now I'm... The ship quivered under the terrific, the unmistakable trip-hammer blow of propellant heptodetonite. Unobserved by either of the two scientists most concerned, the sigma curve had momentarily become a trifle less irregular. The point of the sawtooth wave had touched the zero line. Margie had acted. The visiplate, from which the heavily filtered glare of the vortex had blazed so long, went suddenly black. She did it, Storm! Joan's thought was a mental shriek of pure joy. She really worked! Whether, when the ship went free, Joan pulled Storm down to her merely to anchor him, or for some other reason, whether Cloud grabbed her merely in lieu of a safety line or not, which of the two was first to put arms around the other, these are moot points impossible of decision at this date. The fact is, however, that the two scientists held a remarkably unscientific pose for a good 2 minutes, before Joan thought that she ought to object a little, just on general principles. Even then she did not object with her mind. Instead, she put up her block and used her voice. "But after all, Storm," she began, only to be silenced as beloved women have been silenced throughout the ages. She cut her scream then, and her mind, tender and unafraid, reached out to his. "This might be the perfect time, dear, to merge our minds. I've been scared to death of it all along, but no more. Let's—" "Uh-huh," he demurred. "I'm still afraid of it. I've been thinking about it a lot, and doing some drilling, and the more I play with it, the more scared I get. It's dangerous. It's like playing with duodec. I've just about decided that we'd better let it drop." "Afraid? For yourself or for me? Don't try to lie with your mind, Storm. You can't do it. You're afraid only for me, and you needn't be. I've been thinking too, and digging deep, and I know I'm ready." She looked at him then, her quick, bright, impish grin very much in evidence. "Let's go." "QX, Joni, and thanks. I've been wanting this more than I ever wanted anything before in my life. But not holding hands this time. Heart to heart and cheek to cheek." "Check. The closer the better." They embraced, and again mind flowed into mind, this time with no thought of withholding or reserve on either side. Smoothly, effortlessly, the two essential beings merged, each fitting its tiniest, remotest members into the deepest, ordinarily most inaccessible recesses of the other, fusing as quickly and as delicately and as thoroughly as two drops of water coalescing into one. In that supremely intimate fashion, that ultimate union of line and plane and cellulite, each mind was revealed completely to the other, a revealment which no outsider should expect to share. Finally, after neither ever knew how long, they released each other and each put up automatically a solid block. "I don't know about you, Storm," Joan said then, "but I've had just about all I can take. I'm going to bed and sleep for 1 solid week." "You and me both," Storm agreed, ungrammatically but feelingly. "Good night, sweetheart. And this had all better be strictly hush-hush, don't you think?" "I do think," she assured him. "Can't you just imagine the field day the Sykes would have, taking us apart?" In view of the above, it might be assumed that the parting was immediate, positive, and undemonstrative, but such was not exactly the case. But they did finally separate, and each slept soundly and long. And fairly early the next morning, before either of them got up at least, Cloud sent Joan a thought. "Awake, dear?" "Uh-huh, just. Morning, Storm." "I've got some news for you, Johnny." My brain is firing on 10 times as many barrels as I ever thought it had. I don't know what half of them are doing. Among other things, you made what I think is probably a top-bracket perceiver out of me. So? Well, don't peek at me, please. But why should I say that after having studied in Rigel 4 for 2 years? Women are funny, I guess. But for your information, I've just extracted the 9th root of an 18-digit number in no time at all into the last significant decimal place. And I know the answer's right. How do you like them potatoes, Buster? Nice. We really absorbed each other's stuff, didn't we? But how about joining me in person for a soup con of ham and eggs? That's a thought, my thoughtful friend. A cogent and right knightly thought. I'll be with you in 3 jerks and a wiggle. And she was. Just as they finished eating, Vesta breezed in. Well, you 2 deep sleepers finally crawled out of your sacks, did you? It's confusing, though. That ship's time never agrees with planetary time. But I live here, you know, in this city you call Vegiaton. So I went to bed at noon yesterday, and I've got over half a day's work done already. I saw my folks and bought half of my uncle's bank and made the no gambling declaration, and I want to ask you both something. After the ground uproar here at the port in your honor, will you two and Helen and Joe and Bob and Barbara come with me to a little dance some of my friends are having? You've been so good to me, and I want to show you off a little. We'd be glad to, Vesta, and thanks a lot, Joan said, flashing a thought at Cloud, to let her handle this thing her own way. And I imagine the others would be, too. But, well, it's for you, you know, and we might be intruding. Why, not at all. Vesta waved the objection away with an airy flirt of her tail. You're friends of mine, and everybody's real friends are always welcome, you know, everywhere. And it'll be small and quiet. Only 600 or 800 are being asked, they say. She paused for a moment. Of course, after it gets around that we have you there, a couple of thousand or so strangers will come in, too. But they'll all smell nice, so it'll be QX. How do you know what they'll smell like? Cloud asked. Well, they'll smell like our crowd, of course. If they didn't, they wouldn't want to come in. It's QX, then? For us two, yes. But of course we can't speak for the others. Thanks, you wonderful people. I'll go ask them right now. Joan, have you blown your stack completely? Cloud demanded. Small, quiet, 600 or 800 invited? A couple or thousand or so gate crashers? What do you want to go to a brawl like that for? The chance is too good to miss. It's priceless. She paused, then added obliquely. Storm, have you any idea at all of what Vesta thinks of you? You haven't snooped, I'm sure. No, and I don't intend to. Maybe you ought to. Joan snickered a little, except that it would inflate your ego too much. It's hard to describe. It's not exactly love, and not exactly worship. Either God worship or hero worship. It isn't exactly adoration, but it's very much stronger than mere admiration. A mixture of all these, perhaps, and half a dozen others, coupled with a simply unbelievable amount of pride that you are her friend. It's a peculiarly Vagian thing that Tellurians simply do not feel. But here's why I'm so enthused. It's been over 20 years since any non-Vagian has attended one of these uniquely Vagian parties, except as an outsider. And a Vagian party with outsiders looking on isn't a Vagian party at all. But we, Storm, will be going as insiders. Are you sure of that? Positive. Oh, I know it isn't us she wants, but you, but that won't make any difference. As Vesta's friend in this case having a very special meaning, you're in the center of the inner circle. As friends of yours, the rest of us are in, too. Not in the inner circle, perhaps, but well inside the outside circle, at least. See? Dimly. A friend of a very good friend of mine, eh? I've heard that ditty, but I never thought it meant anything. It does here. We're going to have a time. See you in about an hour? Just about. I've got to check with Nordquist. Here I am, Storm. The Lensman thought came in. Then as Cloud went towards his quarters, it went on. Just want to tell you we won't have anything for you to do here. This is going to be a straight combing job. That won't be too tough, will it? A Tellurian, 60, tall, thin, grave, distinguished looking, or maybe. Exactly. You're getting the idea. Cosmeticians and plastic surgery. He could look like a Kravinian or 30 years old and 200 pounds and slouchy. He could look like anything. He undoubtedly has a background so perfectly established that 15 thoroughly honest Vagians would swear by 11 of their gods that he hasn't left his hometown for 10 years. So every intelligent being on Vegia who hasn't got a live tail with live blood circulating in it is going under the lens and through the ringer if we have to keep Vegia in quarantine for a solid year. He's not going to get away from us this time. I'm betting on you, Nordquist. Clear ether. The Lensmen signed off, and Cloud, at the end of the specified hour, undressed and redressed and went to the computer room. All the others except Joe were already there. "Hi, peoples," Cloud called, then did a double take. "Wow, and likewise, yipes. How come the Tridey outfits didn't all collapse, Joan, when those two spectaculars took up cybernetics?" "I'll never know, Storm." Joan shook her head wonderingly, then went on via thought, and Cloud felt her pang of sheer jealousy. Why is it that big girls are always so much more beautiful than little ones? And the more clothes they take off, the better they look. It simply isn't fair. Cloud's mind reached out and meshed with hers. "Sure it is, sweetheart. They're beauties. You can't take that away from them." And beauties they certainly were. Helen, as has been said, was lissom and dark. Her hair was black, her eyes a midnight blue, her skin a deep golden brown. Barbara, not quite as tall, 5'7" perhaps, was equally beautifully proportioned, and even more striking looking. Her skin was tanned ivory, her eyes were gray. Her hair was a shoulder-length, carefully careless mass of gleaming, flowing, wavy silver. They got a lot of stuff, but believe me, there are several grand lots of stuff they haven't got, too. I wouldn't trade half of you for either one of them, or both of them together. "I believe that, at least, about both of them," Joan giggled mentally. "But how many men—" "Well, how many men do you want?" Cloud interrupted. "Touché. Storm, but do you really—" What would have developed into a scene of purely mental love-making was put to an end by the arrival of Joe McKay, who also paused and made appropriate noises of appreciation. "But there's one thing I don't quite like about this deal," he said finally. "I'm not too easy in my mind about making love to a mole who's packing a Mark 28 Delameter. That darn thing might go off." "Keep your distance, then, Lieutenant McKay," Helen laughed. "Well, are we ready?" They were. They left the ship and walked in a group through the throng of cheering Vagians toward the nearby, gaily decorated stands in which the official greetings and thank yous were to take place. Helen and Babs loved it, just as though they were parading as finalists in a beauty contest. Bob and Joe wished that they could have stayed in the ship and kept their clothes on. Joan didn't quite know whether she liked this kind of thing or not. Of the 6 Tellurians, only Neal Cloud had had enough experience in public near nudity so that it made no difference. And Vesta? Vesta was fairly reveling, openly, unashamedly reveling, in the spotlight with her Tellurian friends. They reached the center stand, were ushered with many flourishes to a reserved section already partly filled by Captain Ross and the lesser officials and crewmen of the Goodwill touring patrol ship Vortex Blaster 2. Not all of the officers, of course, since many had to stay aboard, and comparatively few of the crew, for many men insist on wearing Tellurian garmenture and refuse to tan their hides under ultraviolet radiation, and no untanned white Tellurian skin can take with impunity more than a few minutes of giant Vega's blue-white fury. Of the ceremonies themselves nothing need be said, such things being pretty much of a piece, wherever, whenever, and for whatever reason held. When they were over, Vesta gathered her 6 friends together and led them to the edge of the roped-off area. There she uttered a soundless, to Tellurian ears, whistle, whereupon a group of Vagian youths and girls formed a wedge around the 7 and drove straight through the milling crowd to its edge. There, by an evidently prearranged miracle, they found enough copters to carry them all. End of chapter 15.